The official diagnosis was burnout. My doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense haircut, had used the word with a clinical finality that left no room for argument. I just called it emptiness, a quiet, hollow ache that had settled deep in my chest after a decade of chasing deadlines, promotions, and the vague, shimmering promise of making it in the city. My life had become a series of gray rectangles: the laptop screen, the office windows, the concrete towers that blocked out the sun. So I ran, not toward anything, but away from everything. The escape route came in the form of a half-forgotten inheritance from my great-aunt Maeve, a minority stake in a sprawling cattle ranch in Montana. It was a place I hadn't seen since I was a child, a dusty memory of big skies and the smell of hay. My parents thought it was a wonderful idea, a chance to get my hands dirty and find myself. I thought it was a theatrical, slightly absurd way to hide from my own life for a summer. I arrived on a Tuesday in a rental car that was already coated in a fine layer of amber dust. The driveway was a mile-long affair of packed gravel that rattled the car's chassis and my nerves in equal measure. The main house was a sturdy, two-story log structure that looked like it had grown out of the earth itself. But it wasn't the house that held my attention. It was the man leaning against the fence of a nearby corral, one boot hooked on the lowest rail. He was watching my clumsy approach, his expression unreadable from a distance. Even from 50 yards away, he seemed to belong to the landscape in a way I never could. He was all long lines and solid presence, dressed in worn denim and a plain gray t-shirt that stretched across a broad chest and shoulders. A dusty cowboy hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. This, I guessed, was Cole, the ranch foreman my uncle had mentioned on the phone, the man who, in my uncle's words, actually runs the place. I parked the car, the engines cut off, sounding like a sigh of relief in the vast quiet. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the whisper of wind through tall grass and the distant, mournful call of a cow. I got out, feeling overdressed and flimsy in my clean jeans and city-soft sneakers. Every part of me felt wrong here. Too pale, too clean, too quiet in a world that was loud with life. He didn't move as I approached, just pushed the brim of his hat up a fraction with his thumb. It was then I got my first proper look at his face. It was weathered, tanned by a sun I had only ever tried to avoid. There were fine lines around his eyes, creases that spoke of years spent squinting at horizons. His jaw was strong, covered in a dark stubble that looked rough to the touch. But it was his eyes that snared me. They were a startlingly clear shade of blue, the color of a mountain lake, and they were assessing me with an unnerving stillness. There was no welcome in them, but no hostility either. Just a calm, steady observation. "You must be Leo," he said. His voice was lower than I expected, a low rumble like distant thunder. It wasn't a question. "I am." I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I held out a hand, a force of habit from a world of business meetings and polite introductions. "And you're Cole." He looked at my hand for a beat too long, a flicker of something, amusement, maybe, in his eyes before he took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused and warm. It was a hand that knew work. It swallowed mine completely. The contact sent a strange, unexpected jolt through me, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. He let go almost immediately, but the feeling lingered on my skin, the phantom pressure of his palm against mine. "Your uncle said you'd be coming," he stated, turning his gaze back toward the horses in the corral. "Said you're staying this summer." "That's the plan," I said, trying for a casual tone and failing. I sounded like a tourist. "Escape the city. Get some fresh air." Cole grunted, a non-committal sound deep in his chest. He pulled a small pouch of tobacco and some papers from his back pocket, his movements economical and precise. He tapped out some tobacco, rolled a cigarette with a deftness that was mesmerizing to watch, and stuck it between his lips without lighting it. Not much to escape from out here, except maybe the work. An awkward silence stretched between us. I had no idea what to say. My world was one of witty banter over cocktails, of emails filled with carefully constructed prose. Here, words seemed to be a secondary currency. Presence and action were what mattered, and I was failing at both, just standing there like a misplaced piece of furniture. "My uncle. He said you might be able to, well, show me the ropes." I finally stammered, feeling like an idiot. I don't know the first thing about any of this. I gestured vaguely at the vast expanse of land, the barns, the fences, the sheer, overwhelming reality of the ranch. Cole's eyes drifted over me again, a slow, deliberate appraisal from my impractical shoes to my too neat hair. He took the unlit cigarette from his mouth. He wants you to learn to ride. Again, not a question, a statement of fact. Yes, among other things, I guess. He gave another one of those low grunts and looked back at the horses. A beautiful, muscular chestnut was trotting along the fence line, its tail held high. Riding isn't something you learn from a book, city boy. The nickname should have stung, but coming from him, it just sounded accurate. It was what I was. A city boy, completely out of his depth. I'm aware of that, I said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my tone. That's why I'm asking for help. He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was beginning to dip lower, painting the undersides of the clouds in strokes of orange and pink. I was about to say something else, to fill the silence that felt so uncomfortable to me, but I stopped myself. I had a feeling that he operated on a different clock than I did. Rushing him would be pointless. Finally, he turned his head and met my gaze. The blue of his eyes seemed to deepen in the changing light. A decision had been made. All right, he said, the single word carrying a surprising weight. We'll start tomorrow. 6 a.m. Don't be late. He placed the cigarette back between his lips, a permanent fixture now. And wear boots. Those things, he nodded at my sneakers, will get you killed. With that, he turned and walked away, his stride long and easy, leaving me standing alone by the corral. The dust settled around my feet. The air was growing cooler. I watched him go, a solid, steady figure moving toward the largest barn, already a part of the landscape again. And in the hollow space in my chest, something new and unfamiliar stirred. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was a flicker of anticipation, a nervous, terrifying flutter. I had come here to be alone, to disappear. But I had a feeling that for the first time in a long time, I was about to be truly seen. The next morning, I was awake at 5. The pre-dawn light was a soft, pearly gray, and the world outside my window was hushed and still. I had slept terribly, my city-wired brain unable to adjust to the profound silence of the countryside. Every creak of the old house, every distant animal cry, had sent my thoughts spinning. Most of them, embarrassingly, had been about Cole, about the pressure of his hand, the unnerving focus of his gaze, the low timbre of his voice. It was ridiculous. I'd known the man for less than 10 minutes. I pulled on the only pair of boots I owned, stiff leather things I'd bought for a hiking trip years ago and barely worn since. They felt clumsy and foreign on my feet. I found my way to the kitchen, a huge, welcoming room with a massive wooden table at its center. A pot of coffee was already brewing, its rich scent filling the air. My aunt, a woman with Maeve's kind face and a practical energy that seemed to power the whole ranch, was already there, pulling a tray of muffins from the oven. "Morning, Leo. Sleep all right?" she asked, her smile warm. "Like a log," I lied, pouring myself a mug of coffee. It was black and strong enough to strip paint. "Cole's already out at the stables. He's not one for waiting around." She slid a muffin onto a plate for me. "Don't let him scare you. His bark is worse than his bite." "He doesn't seem to do much of either," I observed, taking a bite of the muffin. It was warm and studded with blueberries. She laughed, a hearty, genuine sound. "You've got that right. He's a man of few words. But he's the best horseman I've ever seen. If anyone can teach you, it's him." I finished my coffee and muffin, the nervous energy in my stomach making it hard to swallow. By the time I made it to the stables, the sun was just beginning to crest the mountains, spilling golden light across the valley. The air was crisp and smelled of hay, earth, and manure. It was a primal, honest smell that was a world away from the exhaust fumes and stale air conditioning of my old life. Cole was there, just as my aunt had said. He was in one of the stalls, brushing down the same chestnut horse from yesterday. He moved with a quiet, fluid grace, the brush strokes long and firm. He hadn't noticed me yet. It gave me a moment to just watch him, unobserved. The morning light caught the lines of his back and shoulders, the muscles shifting under his shirt with each movement. He murmured something to the horse, a low, soothing sound that I couldn't quite make out. The animal stood perfectly still for him, its ears twitching, its large, dark eyes soft. There was a connection between them, a silent understanding that was both beautiful and intimidating. I felt like an intruder on a private moment. I must have made a sound, a scuff of my new boots on the stone floor, because he stopped and turned. His blue eyes found me in the dim light of the stable. "You're on time," he said. It was almost a compliment. "You said not to be late." He nodded, giving the horse a final pat on the neck. "This is Copper. He's who you'll be learning on. He's patient." He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my boots. "Those'll do for now." He led the horse from the stall and into the central aisle, securing him to a post. "First lesson: saddling. If you can't do this, you can't ride." For the next hour, I was his clumsy apprentice. My hands, so adept at typing and sketching, were useless here. The saddle blanket felt awkward and heavy. I couldn't seem to get it to lie flat. The saddle itself was a monster of leather and steel, far heavier than I'd anticipated. My first attempt to lift it onto Kappa's back was a pathetic failure. I barely got it halfway up before my arms trembled and I had to set it down. Cole watched me, his arms crossed over his chest, that unlit cigarette in its usual place. He didn't laugh. He didn't mock me. He just watched, his expression unreadable. I could feel the heat of a flush creeping up my neck. I was a child, a weakling. "Again," he said, his voice even. I tried again, bending my knees this time, using my legs as he'd silently instructed me with a slight nod. This time, I managed to swing it up, but it landed with a heavy thud, skewed completely to one side. Copper shifted, his ears flattening for a second in annoyance. "Easy," Cole said, his voice directed at the horse, not me. He stepped forward, his hand stroking Kappa's neck until the animal settled. Then he turned to me. He was close now, closer than he'd been yesterday. I could smell him. Not cologne, but something far more elemental. Soap, leather, the faint scent of the tobacco he always had with him, and something else, something warm and uniquely male. It was distracting, overwhelming. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low. "It's not about strength. It's about balance." He moved behind me. My breath hitched. I stood frozen as he reached around me, his hands covering mine on the saddle. His body was a wall of warmth at my back, not quite touching, but I could feel the heat radiating from him. My heart started a frantic, stupid rhythm against my ribs. "Feel the weight of it," he murmured, his voice right beside my ear. A shiver traced its way down my spine. "Find the center," his hands guided mine, adjusting our grip. His fingers were calloused and strong, his touch surprisingly gentle as he repositioned my own. "Now swing. Not up. Over." In one motion. Together, we lifted the saddle. This time, it felt almost weightless. It swung up and over, settling onto Kappa's back with a soft, perfect whisper of leather on wool. It was perfectly centered. He didn't move away. His hands were still over mine, his chest still a breath away from my back. I could feel his breath, warm against the side of my neck. I was acutely aware of every point of near contact. My mind went completely blank. All the anxiety, all the self-consciousness, was erased and replaced by a thrumming, hyper-awareness of him. "This is just a lesson," I told myself. "He's teaching me." But my body wasn't listening. It was responding to his proximity in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He seemed to realize how close he was at the same moment I did. He dropped his hands and stepped back, breaking the spell. The air rushed into the space between us, feeling suddenly cold. "Like that," he said, his voice a little rougher than before. He cleared his throat and turned his attention to the cinch, avoiding my eyes. "Now the cinch. You need it tight, but not too tight. You gotta know the difference." I watched him work, my own hands trembling slightly. I tried to focus on what he was doing, on the intricate dance of straps and buckles, but my mind kept replaying the last 30 seconds. The warmth of his body, the feel of his hands over mine, the sound of his voice in my ear. I was in so much trouble. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Every morning at 6, I would meet him at the stables. We would saddle Copper, a process I slowly, painstakingly began to master under his watchful eye. He was a patient teacher, but an exacting one. He made me do it over and over until the movements became less foreign, more ingrained. He rarely praised me, but I started to recognize the slight, almost imperceptible nod he would give when I did something right. I found myself craving that small gesture more than I wanted to admit. Most of my time was spent just watching. After the saddling lesson, he would go about his morning chores, and I would trail after him like a lost puppy. I watched him mend fences, his movements economical and sure. I watched him haul hay bales that I could barely budge, the muscles in his arms and back cording with the effort. I watched him work with the other horses, his voice low and calm, his hands gentle but firm. He moved through his world with a competence and a quiet confidence that I found endlessly captivating. I started to notice the small things. The way he'd push his hat back on his head when he was thinking. The way the corner of his mouth would twitch when one of the other ranch hands told a bad joke. The way his blue eyes would soften when he looked at a newborn calf. These were tiny cracks in his stoic facade, glimpses of the man underneath the foreman, and I collected them like treasures. I was supposed to be healing, finding myself, whatever that meant. Instead, I was becoming obsessed with finding him. My journal, which I'd intended to fill with profound thoughts about nature and my own emotional recovery, was instead filled with observations about Cole. Cole's hands are not just calloused, they're mapped with a history of hard work. I wonder what they would feel like. Or, he has a way of being completely still that isn't empty. It's full of presence. It makes me feel loud. One afternoon, he was in the paddock, working with a young, skittish filly. She was dancing sideways, her eyes wide with fear, refusing to let him get close. I sat on the top rail of the fence, my usual perch, watching. He didn't use force. He just stood in the center of the dusty circle, his posture relaxed, and waited. He let her run, let her buck, let her exhaust her own fear. Every so often, he would speak to her, that same low murmur he'd used with Copper. Slowly, cautiously, she began to calm down. Her frantic circles widened, then slowed. She stopped, her sides heaving, and looked at him. He didn't move toward her. He just waited. After a long, tense moment, she took a hesitant step toward him. Then another. She eventually walked right up to him and nudged his shoulder with her nose. He reached up and stroked her neck, his movements slow and deliberate. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until it came out in a rush. There was a profound lesson in what I had just witnessed. About patience. About letting things come to you in their own time. It was the antithesis of my entire life, of my city-bred need to push, to strive, to control. Later that day, I was helping him by carrying a bucket of tools while he repaired a broken gate latch. My help mostly consisted of staying out of his way and handing him things. "You're quiet today," he observed, not looking up from his work. He was tightening a bolt, his forearm flexing with the motion. "Just watching," I said. "You're good with them. The horses." He stopped and looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. It was one of the first times I had initiated a conversation that wasn't about a specific task. "It's about trust," he said simply. "They need to know you're not a threat." "How do you show them that?" I asked, genuinely curious. He went back to tightening the bolt. "You don't show them. You just are. You're steady. You're patient. They feel it." He gave the bolt a final turn and stood up, testing the gate. It swung smoothly. Animals know. They can smell fear. Or other things. His eyes met mine, and for a second, I was sure he could smell it on me. Not fear, but this constant, thrumming awareness. This yearning that had taken root in my chest and was growing wilder every day. The look held for a beat too long, charged with an unspoken question. My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt exposed, as if he could see right through my carefully constructed walls and into the messy, chaotic truth of what I was feeling. Then he broke the contact, turning to gather the tools. "We haven't even gotten you on a horse yet," he said, his tone back to its usual gruffness. "I'm not in a hurry," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He glanced at me over his shoulder, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "Maybe you should be." The first time my hand brushed his, it was an accident. We were in the tack room, a small, cluttered space that smelled richly of leather and saddle soap. He was showing me how to clean and oil a bridle, his large hands moving with practiced ease over the complex web of straps. I reached for a tin of oil at the same time he did. The backs of our hands brushed. It was nothing, a feather-light touch that lasted less than a second, but it felt like an electric shock. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Sorry," I mumbled, my face hot. "It's fine," he said, his voice neutral. But when I dared to look up, I saw him rubbing the back of his hand with his thumb, right where I had touched him. He was looking at the bridle, but his focus seemed to be somewhere else entirely. My internal analysis of that moment lasted for hours. It was an accident. It meant nothing, except it felt like it meant everything. It was the first unplanned physical contact we'd had since the day he'd helped me with the saddle. Each time since, he'd been careful to maintain a sliver of distance between us, a professional, teacherly space. But that accidental touch had breached the perimeter. It was a tiny, insignificant event that felt monumental. The small touches began to happen more frequently after that. Whether they were accidental or not, I couldn't be sure, and the ambiguity was maddening. Our shoulders would brush as we walked through a narrow barn door. His fingers would graze mine as he handed me a rein. Once, I stumbled over an uneven patch of ground, and his hand shot out, steadying me with a firm grip on my arm. His touch lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he let go. Each time, my body would betray me with a jolt of awareness, a quickening of my pulse. I would replay the moments in my head, dissecting them for meaning. Was he just being helpful? Or was he, like me, navigating this strange, unspoken tension that was building between us? I would watch him afterward, searching his face for any sign, but his stoic mask was always firmly in place. He gave nothing away. All the turmoil, all the analysis, was happening inside my own head. I was living in a world of subtext, of micro-expressions, and the significance of a lingering touch, and it was driving me slowly crazy. The promise of learning to ride had become a secondary plot point in the story of us. The real lessons were happening in these quiet, charged moments. I was learning the language of his silence, the weight of his gaze, the geography of his presence. One evening, a sudden summer thunderstorm rolled in, the sky turning a bruised purple-gray. We had ridden out farther than usual, he on his own powerful black gelding, and me, finally, on copper, to check on a section of fence near the river. The first drops of rain were fat and cold, hitting the dusty ground with audible plops. Within minutes, the sky opened up. "There's a line shack not far from here," Cole yelled over the rising wind and the rumble of thunder. "We can wait it out there." I was not a confident rider yet. The sudden storm, the thunder that made copper skittish beneath me, it all sent a spike of panic through my chest. Cole seemed to sense it. He rode up beside me, his presence a calming anchor in the chaos. "Just follow me. Keep your heels down and trust the horse," he commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. We rode hard, the rain plastering my hair to my forehead and my shirt to my skin. I focused on the back of Cole's yellow slicker, a beacon in the gray deluge. He led us into a thicket of pine trees where a small, rough-hewn cabin stood, barely more than a single room. It was old, but it was solid. We dismounted, tying the horses under the relative shelter of the dense pines. We were both soaked to the bone. We stumbled inside the shack, the air thick with the smell of old wood, dust, and pine needles. It was dark, the only light coming from the single small, grimy window. Cole found an old lantern and, after a few tries with a matchbook from his pocket, managed to light it. A warm, flickering glow pushed back the shadows. He looked at me, his hair dark and slick with rain, water dripping from his chin. A small smile touched his lips, the first genuine, unguarded smile I had ever seen from him. "Well," he said, his voice laced with a humor I hadn't heard before. "This is cozy." My teeth were chattering, partly from the cold, partly from the adrenaline. Cozy is one word for it. There was a small, pot-bellied stove in the corner and a stack of firewood next to it. Cole, ever practical, immediately set about building a fire. I just stood there, dripping on the wooden floor, feeling useless again. "You can take your shirt off, you know," he said, not looking at me. "Hang it by the stove. No point in catching a chill." It was a perfectly logical suggestion, but the thought of being shirtless in this tiny, enclosed space with him sent another jolt through me. This one pure, unadulterated panic. But standing there shivering was not an option either. Hesitantly, I peeled off my soaked t-shirt. The cold air hit my skin, raising goosebumps. I avoided his eyes as I hung it on a nail near the rapidly warming stove. I was painfully aware of my own body, my pale, untanned skin, my lack of ranch-honed muscle. I crossed my arms over my chest, a feeble attempt to hide. When I finally dared to look at him, he had taken his own shirt off as well, and my breath caught in my throat. His torso was a landscape of lean, hard muscle, defined by years of physical labor. His skin was tanned, except for the paler lines where his t-shirt sleeves usually sat. A light dusting of dark hair trailed from his chest down over his flat stomach. There were a few old scars, faint white lines against his tanned skin, a long one across his ribs, a smaller one on his shoulder. They weren't blemishes, they were part of his history, just like the calluses on his hands. He was beautiful, not in a polished, gym-sculpted way, but in a raw, functional, utterly masculine way. He caught me staring. I looked away quickly, my face burning. But he didn't comment. He just hung his shirt next to mine and turned his back to the stove, soaking in the warmth. The firelight flickered across his skin, making the shadows and contours of his muscles dance. We stood in silence for a long time, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the drumming of rain on the roof. It should have been awkward, the two of us half-naked in a tiny cabin. But it wasn't. The shared experience of the storm, the simple goal of getting warm and dry, had stripped away some of the layers between us. It was a moment of forced, primitive intimacy. "You ever been caught in a storm like this before?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Not without an apartment to run into," I admitted, my arms still crossed over my chest. He chuckled, a low, soft sound. "It's different out here. You can't run from the weather. You just have to find a way to live with it." We talked. For the first time, we really talked. He asked me about the city, about my job. He listened with that same unnerving stillness, but this time it felt less like an assessment and more like genuine interest. I told him about the burnout, about the feeling of being a cog in a machine. I didn't mean to, the words just came out, drawn by the strange intimacy of the firelit cabin and his quiet attention. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He just nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Sounds loud," he said finally. "It is," I agreed. "Even the silence is loud." Then, in a surprising turn, he offered a piece of himself. "I lived in a city once," he said, his gaze on the fire. "For about 6 months. After I got out of the army." I was stunned. I couldn't picture him anywhere but here, against a backdrop of mountains and wide-open spaces. "I can't imagine that." "Neither could I," he said with a dry huff of a laugh. Felt like I was breathing through a straw the whole time. "The buildings, they block the sky. I need to see the sky." He looked up, as if he could see it through the roof. "I need to know it's there." It was the most he had ever revealed about himself. A moment of unexpected softness, of vulnerability. He wasn't just a stoic foreman. He was a man who had made a conscious choice to be here, a man who needed the open sky to breathe. It reframed everything I thought I knew about him. He wasn't just stuck here, he was rooted here. The rain eventually slowed to a drizzle, and the thunder faded into a distant grumble. The fire had warmed the small cabin, and we were both mostly dry. We pulled our shirts back on. They were still damp, but warm. The air between us had changed. The tension was still there, but it was different now. It was softer, laced with a new understanding. We had shared something more than just shelter from a storm. We had shared a piece of ourselves. As we rode back to the main house in the clean, rain-washed twilight, a comfortable silence settled between us. But my mind was anything but silent. I kept replaying his words. "I need to see the sky." It was such a simple, profound statement. And I realized, with a startling clarity, that for the past few weeks, Cole had become my sky. The vast, complicated, and utterly captivating horizon I couldn't stop looking at. The day of the rail finally came. It was a week after the storm, a hot, dry afternoon. The air was thick with the smell of sun-baked earth and sweet clover. The initial awkwardness after our forced intimacy in the lined shack had faded, replaced by an easier camaraderie. The lessons continued, and I was getting better. I could saddle Copper without fumbling, and I could manage a steady trot without feeling like I was about to fly off. But my balance was still my weak point. "You're still too stiff," Cole said, watching me circle the training pen. He was leaning against the fence in his usual pose, arms crossed, hat low. "You're fighting the horse, not riding with him." "I'm trying not to fall off," I retorted, my voice a little breathless. "You won't fall off if you loosen up. Your center of gravity is all in your head." He pushed himself off the fence. "All right, dismount." I brought Copper to a halt and swung my leg over, landing on the dusty ground with less grace than I'd hoped. "We're going to try something different," he said, his expression serious. He walked over to the high fence that enclosed the pen. He patted the top rail. It was a thick, smooth log about 5 inches in diameter, maybe 5 feet off the ground. "What are we doing?" I asked, eyeing the rail with suspicion. "You're going to learn what balance feels like." He gestured to the fence. "Up you go." I stared at him. "You want me to get on that?" "I want you to sit on it, like you're on a horse." This felt ridiculous, a bizarre cowboy hazing ritual. But the look on his face was completely serious. With a sigh, I tried to pull myself up. The rail was too high, and my arms had no leverage. I felt that familiar flush of incompetence. "Seriously?" I grumbled, dropping back to the ground. He let out a small, exasperated sigh. Before I could protest or even process what was happening, he stepped forward. He placed one hand on my hip and the other under my thigh. "Just let me." And then he lifted me. It was effortless for him. I felt weightless for a second, a strange, dizzying moment of being completely in his control. He lifted me up and set me down on the rail as if I weighed nothing at all. My heart leaped into my throat. I was perched precariously on the round log, my legs dangling. I wobbled immediately, my hands flying out to steady myself. "Whoa," I yelped. He was standing right in front of me, between my legs. His hands were still on me, one resting lightly on my thigh, the other on my hip, holding me steady. He was so close. I was looking down at the top of his dusty hat. I could smell the sun on his skin, the faint scent of his soap. My entire nervous system was on fire. "Don't look down," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through his hands into my body. He tilted his head up, and his blue eyes met mine. We were inches apart. "Look at me." I couldn't have looked away if I wanted to. His gaze was intense, holding me in place more effectively than his hands. "Now," he said softly, "hold on." He didn't mean hold on to him. He meant hold on to the rail, to my own balance. But the words hung in the air between us, heavy with 1,000 other possible meanings. My hands were gripping the rough wood on either side of me, my knuckles white. But all I could think about was letting go and holding on to him instead, wrapping my arms around his neck, burying my face in his shoulder. "Breathe," he commanded gently. His thumb moved in a slow, almost imperceptible circle on my hip. Was he aware he was doing it? Was it a conscious touch or an absent gesture? My mind scrambled to analyze, to understand, but for the first time, my thoughts were drowned out by pure feeling. "I am breathing," I whispered, and it was true. I was breathing him in. The heat from his body rose up, enveloping me. I could feel the solid strength of him, the sheer physical power held in careful check. "No, you're not. You're holding your breath." You're tense. His hand on my thigh tightened slightly. "Relax your legs. Let them hang. Find your center. It's here." He pressed lightly against my lower abdomen with the heel of his hand. The touch was electric, intimate. It shot straight to my core, a bolt of pure heat. I'm losing my mind. This is a lesson. Just a lesson. But his eyes were telling a different story. The professional distance was gone. Completely gone. In its place was something raw and questioning. He was watching my face, my eyes, my mouth, as if he were trying to read a language he was only just beginning to understand. The silence stretched, thick and buzzing with unspoken things. The world narrowed to this single point in time. The sun on my back, the rough wood under my hands, and the overwhelming presence of the man standing between my legs. His scent, his heat, his gaze. He finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "You this nervous around everyone, Leo? Or is it just me?" The question was a direct hit. There was no subtext, no room for interpretation. He was asking. He was finally asking. My mouth went dry. I couldn't form words. All I could do was stare at him, my heart hammering a frantic, undeniable answer against my ribs. I knew, in that moment, that he could see it all. The weeks of observation, the yearning, the fear, the desperate, hopeless crush that had bloomed into something so much bigger. It was all there, naked in my eyes. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. No, it wasn't everyone. It was only him. Always him. A muscle feathered in his jaw. His eyes darkened, the blue deepening to the color of a stormy sea. He had his answer. He had seen it, and he hadn't looked away. He hadn't flinched. If anything, he leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, closing the small distance between us even more. His hand on my thigh was no longer just steadying me. It was holding me, claiming. The air crackled. The tipping point had been reached. The tension that had been simmering for weeks had finally, irrevocably boiled over. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The conversation was happening in the space between our eyes, in the slight tremor of his hand on my skin, in the way my breath hitched in my chest. He was the one who broke the spell, but not in the way I expected. He didn't step back. He didn't release me. He just held my gaze for one more long, searing moment, and then his eyes dropped to my mouth. It was a deliberate, possessive look, a promise. Then, with a slow, controlled movement, he took a half step back, his hands falling away from me. The loss of his touch was immediate and sharp, like a physical blow. The air felt cold again. "Okay," he said, his voice thick. He cleared his throat. "That's enough for today." He turned and walked away without another word, leaving me perched on the rail, my body trembling, my mind a complete and utter wreck. I watched him walk toward the barn, his stride as steady as ever, but I knew something had shattered between us. Or maybe something had finally been forged. I stayed there for a long time, my hands gripping the wood, the echo of his touch burning on my skin. The lesson was over, and a new, terrifying, and exhilarating one was about to begin. I didn't see him for the rest of the evening. I slid down from the rail on shaky legs and managed to get myself back to the main house, my mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and maybes. I ate dinner with my aunt and uncle, moving food around my plate, contributing nothing to the conversation. My thoughts were a looped recording of the moment at the fence, his eyes, his voice, his question. Is it just me? The sun went down. The house grew quiet. I went to my room, but I couldn't settle. The air was too still, the silence too loud. The emptiness in my chest was gone, replaced by a roaring, anxious energy. He knew. I had all but admitted it, and he hadn't run. He hadn't mocked me. He had looked at my mouth. I paced my room like a caged animal. What now? Do we pretend it never happened? Do we go back to our careful dance of accidental touches and loaded silences? I couldn't. I couldn't go back. The ambiguity had been agonizing, but this new certainty was a different kind of torture. A certainty that he knew, but a total uncertainty about what he would do with that knowledge. I had to know. It was nearly midnight when I made the decision. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I had ever done. I pulled my boots back on, slipped out of the house, and started walking toward the small bunkhouse where the single ranch hands, including Cole, stayed. The moon was bright, casting long, distorted shadows across the yard. The air was cool and smelled of night-blooming flowers and damp earth. Every step felt momentous, a march toward an unknown fate. Rejection, humiliation, or something else. A single light was on in the bunkhouse. It spilled from the window of the small room at the very end. His room. My courage almost failed me. I could turn back now. He would never know I had come. We could try to fall back into our old rhythm tomorrow. But the memory of his thumb stroking my hip, the intensity in his eyes, pushed me forward. I couldn't live with the not knowing. I reached his door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the wood. I took a deep, shaky breath, and I knocked. The sound was shockingly loud in the night's quiet. For a long moment, there was no response. My heart sank. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was ignoring me. I was about to turn away, to retreat in shame, when I heard the sound of movement inside. A floorboard creaked. The door opened. He stood there, framed in the warm yellow light from the room behind him. He was shirtless, wearing only a pair of worn jeans slung low on his hips. His hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just splashed water on his face. He wasn't surprised to see me. His expression was calm, expectant. He had been waiting. "Leo," he said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. I couldn't speak. The words I had rehearsed in my head evaporated. I just stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, my heart in my throat. He looked at me, his gaze taking in my tense posture, my wide eyes. He sighed, a soft, weary sound. "You gonna stand out there all night?" he asked, stepping back to let me in. I entered his room. It was small and sparse, brutally simple. A narrow bed, neatly made. A wooden dresser. A single chair. A few books stacked on the floor. It smelled like him, that clean, soapy, leathery scent that had been haunting my dreams for weeks. He closed the door behind me, and the soft click of the latch sealed us in. He leaned against the door, crossing his arms over his bare chest. The posture was defensive, guarded, but his eyes were not. They were fixed on me, patient. He was giving me the floor. He was letting me set the terms. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a ragged whisper. What was that? Today, at the fence. He didn't pretend not to understand. What do you think it was? He countered, his voice quiet. This was it. The precipice. I could back down, make a joke, pretend I was just confused about the lesson, or I could jump. I took a breath. I jumped. I think. I started, my voice trembling. I had to stop and swallow. I think you know how I feel about you. The confession hung in the small room, terrifying and liberating all at once. And I think maybe you feel it too. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of that vulnerability I had seen in the line shack. He pushed himself off the door and took a slow step toward me. Then another. He stopped when he was just a foot away. I've been on this ranch for 15 years, he said, his voice low and gravelly. My life is simple. It's quiet. It's this, he gestured around the small room. You come here from a different world. A world I don't fit into. My heart sank. This was the rejection. The gentle letdown. We're too different. It would never work. You're here for the summer, he continued, his eyes searching mine. And then you'll go back. And I'll still be here. Maybe I won't go back, I heard myself say, the words surprising me as much as they probably surprised him. The thought had been a seed in the back of my mind, but saying it out loud made it real. The idea of returning to my gray, hollow life was suddenly unbearable. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sad and knowing. It's easy to say that now. This place is new to you. It's an escape. But this life, it's hard. It's lonely. I've been lonely my whole life, I said, the truth of it hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Even when I was surrounded by millions of people, I've never been lonelier than I was in that city. I took a step closer, closing the remaining distance between us. I had to crane my neck to look up at him. I haven't felt lonely since I got here. His gaze was unwavering. He was listening, absorbing every word. I'm not asking for forever, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm not asking for anything. I had to know. Am I crazy? Am I imagining this thing between us? He was silent for a long, agonizing moment. His eyes roamed my face, as if memorizing it. Then, he slowly lifted his hand. I flinched, expecting him to push me away, to put a hand on my shoulder and create distance. But he didn't. His calloused, work-roughened fingers came up to gently cup my jaw. His thumb brushed against my cheek, a touch so tender it made my knees weak. The contrast between the roughness of his skin and the gentleness of his touch was my undoing. No, he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded like awe. You're not crazy. And then he lowered his head and kissed me. It was not a rushed or desperate kiss. It was slow, tentative, a question. His lips were firm and warm, softer than I had imagined. He tasted of coffee and the faint, clean taste of mint. For a second, we just stayed like that, a simple, chaste pressing of mouths. A moment of pure, breathless discovery. Then, I let out a shaky breath, and something inside me broke. All the tension, all the yearning, all the weeks of silent observation and desperate hope came pouring out. I leaned into him, my hands coming up to grip his arms, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the universe. He responded instantly. The kiss deepened. His other hand came up to cradle the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. His mouth opened over mine, and the kiss turned from a question into an answer. A statement. It was a kiss full of all the words we hadn't said. It was patient and demanding, gentle and hungry all at once. It was the most honest thing I had ever experienced. It felt like coming home. He broke the kiss slowly, resting his forehead against mine. We were both breathing heavily. My eyes were closed. I didn't want to open them. I wanted to stay in this perfect, suspended moment forever. Leo, he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. I opened my eyes. His were dark and intense, all the walls gone, all the guards down. I was seeing him, the real him, and he was seeing me. Stay, he said. It wasn't a question or a command. It was a plea. I didn't need to answer. I just laced my fingers through his, my hand feeling small and fragile in his powerful grip. It was all the confirmation he needed. He led me to the narrow bed, and we sat on the edge, our hands still entwined. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting a silver stripe across the floor. We didn't talk. We just sat there, in the quiet of his small room, holding hands, letting the reality of what had just happened settle over us. The silence wasn't awkward or empty. It was full of promise, full of relief, full of a terrifying, beautiful hope. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of warmth at my back. For a moment, disoriented, I didn't know where I was. The room was dim, filled with the soft gray light of early dawn. The air smelled of him. Then it all came rushing back. The knock on the door, the confession, the kiss. My eyes snapped open. I was in his bed. We hadn't done anything more than kiss, but sometime in the night, we had laid down, still fully clothed, and fallen asleep. I was on my side, and he was curled behind me, his arm draped loosely over my waist, his body a solid, comforting presence. His breathing was a slow, steady rhythm against my back. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm haze of sleep. What have I done? The cold light of day was here, and with it came the inevitable flood of anxiety. This was real. This wasn't a fantasy I could replay in my head. This had consequences. He had said it himself. My life was temporary here. His was permanent. What did he want from me? What did I want from him? Was this a mistake? A moment of weakness for both of us, born of loneliness and proximity. My heart started to pound. I had to get out of there. I needed space. I needed to think. Carefully, slowly, I began to untangle myself from his arm. I held my breath, trying not to wake him. I slid off the bed, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor with a soft thud. I stood there for a moment, my back to him, my fists clenched. I couldn't look at him. If I looked at him, I might not be able to leave. I grabbed my boots, my movements stiff and clumsy. I had to get back to my room in the main house before anyone was awake, before anyone knew. The thought of my aunt or uncle finding out, of the questions, the looks, it was too much. Just as my hand touched the doorknob, his voice, thick with sleep, cut through the silence. "Leo?" I froze, my back still to him. My eyes squeezed shut. There was a rustle of sheets, the creak of the bed as he sat up. "Where are you going?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't turn around. The silence stretched, filled with my own frantic, panicked thoughts. He was going to say it was a mistake. He was going to regret it. The foreman, the stoic, self-contained man, had a moment of weakness with the fragile city boy. He would want to erase it. "Look at me," he said. His voice was quiet, but there was a firm command in it that I couldn't ignore. Slowly, I turned around. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hair tousled from sleep. The gray morning light softened the hard lines of his face, making him look younger. He wasn't wearing a shirt, and the sight of his bare chest, his strong shoulders, sent a fresh wave of heat and confusion through me. He was watching me, his blue eyes clear and searching. There was no anger in them, no regret, just a quiet, waiting stillness. "You were leaving," he stated, his voice flat. I had to get back," I stammered, gesturing vaguely toward the main house. Before anyone." "Before anyone what?" he pressed, his gaze unwavering. "Knew you spent the night in my room." I flinched. Hearing him say it out loud made it sound sordid. Illicit. I didn't want to make things awkward. I mumbled, looking at the floor. He was silent for a moment. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Come here." I didn't move. "Leo, please." The please was what did it. It was so uncool, so vulnerable. I took a hesitant step toward him, then another, until I was standing in front of him, between his knees. I still couldn't meet his eyes. I stared at the faint scar on his shoulder instead. He reached out, not with the fire and urgency of last night, but with a quiet, deliberate gentleness. He took my hand. His fingers were warm, his grip firm and reassuring. He didn't pull me closer. He just held my hand, his thumb stroking softly over my knuckles. "Last night," he began, his voice low and steady, "was not a mistake." My head snapped up. My eyes met his. "I woke up this morning," he continued, his gaze intense, holding mine. "And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I felt safe. And I thought you were feeling it too." The simple, honest confession dismantled my panic completely. It sliced through the layers of my anxiety and touched the core of what I was feeling too. Safe. That was the word. In his arms, in his small, sparse room, I had felt safer than I had in years. Tears pricked my eyes. I felt so stupid, so foolish for my panicked flight. I whispered, my voice choked. I do. I got scared. Scared of what? He asked gently. Of this. Of you. Of me. I said, the words tumbling out. Of what it means. I'm not. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This? I repeated, gesturing between us. Whatever this is. I'm good at being alone. I'm not good at not being alone. A small, sad smile touched his lips. Maybe we can learn together. He squeezed my hand. I'm scared too, Leo. You think I'm not? You turn my whole world upside down just by walking into it. But running away from it, that feels more terrifying than staying. He was right. The thought of going back to my life before him, my life of quiet, gray emptiness, was the most terrifying thing of all. He tugged on my hand, a gentle invitation. I let him pull me down, and I sat on the bed beside him, our shoulders and knees touching. The contact was grounding. Real. We sat in silence as the sun rose, the room slowly filling with golden light. It was a different kind of silence than the one from last night. It was a morning after silence, but not one of awkwardness or regret. It was a silence of processing, of acceptance. A silence that said, here we are. Now what? So, I said finally, breaking the quiet. Do I still have a writing lesson at 6 a.m.? He looked at me, and a real, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him, chasing away the last of the shadows and making the lines around his eyes crinkle. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Yeah, he said, his voice warm with laughter. But maybe we can start at 7 today. The weeks that followed were a strange and wonderful navigation of a new territory. Outwardly, not much changed. I still met him for my lessons. I still trailed after him during his chores. But everything was different. The subtext had become text. The accidental touches were no longer accidental. A hand on the small of my back as we walked through a gate. His fingers lingering on mine when he passed me a tool. His leg pressed against mine under the dinner table when my aunt and uncle invited him to eat with us. They were small, private gestures, a secret language that only we understood. But they were everything. There was, of course, a test. It came in the form of the other ranch hands, specifically 2 of them, a pair of young cowboys named Jesse and Dean. They weren't malicious, but they were observant. They noticed the shift. They saw the way Cole looked at me when he thought no one was watching. They saw the way I looked at him all the time. One afternoon, I was trying to repair a water trough, a task Cole had given me that I was woefully unqualified for, when they ambled over. Hey, city boy, Jesse said, a cocky grin on his face. Still playing cowboy. Still trying, I said, my voice tight. I hated that nickname from anyone but Cole. Looks like you're getting some special instruction, Dean added, nudging Jesse with his elbow. Cole's never spent this much time on a greenhorn before. My stomach clenched. I kept my eyes on the wrench in my hand. He's a good teacher. Oh, I'll bet he is, Jesse snickered. The insinuation was clear. Teaches you how to ride and everything. Heat flooded my face. I didn't know what to say. Any denial would sound defensive and weak. Any confirmation was unthinkable. I was frozen, the wrench feeling heavy and useless in my hand. Just as Jesse was about to say something else, a shadow fell over us. You two got nothing better to do than stand around gossiping. It was Cole. He had come up behind them, silent as a ghost. His voice was dangerously quiet, colder than I had ever heard it. Jesse and Dean visibly straightened up. Their smirks vanished. Just making conversation, boss, Jesse mumbled, suddenly finding the toes of his boots fascinating. The fence on the north pasture needs checking, Cole said, his voice flat. Now, they scrambled to obey, practically tripping over each other in their haste to get away. They didn't look back. Cole stood there for a moment, watching them go. Then he turned to me. His face was a hard, unreadable mask. Don't pay them any mind, he said, his voice back to its normal pitch, but with a hard edge still lingering. I'm fine. I lied, my hands trembling slightly. He looked at me, really looked at me, and his expression softened. He saw right through my lie. He stepped closer and, without a word, took the wrench from my hand. His fingers brushed mine, a brief, reassuring touch. He knelt, turning his attention to the trough. "Let me show you," he said quietly. "This bolt is stripped. You need to brace it from the other side." He didn't mention the other hands again. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words could. He had defended me. He had protected me. He had stood between me and the rest of the world and quietly, firmly, taken my side. In that moment, kneeling in the dust beside a broken water trough, I had never felt more loved. The end of the summer loomed, a date on a calendar that I was desperately trying to ignore. My sabbatical had a theoretical endpoint. My apartment in the city was still waiting. My old life was still there, a ghost I had successfully exorcised for a few months. The unspoken question hung between us. What next? We never talked about it directly. It felt too big, too fragile to be handled with clumsy words. Instead, we focused on the now, the quiet moments, the shared smiles, the secret touches, the nights I would slip out of the main house and walk to his room, and the mornings I would wake up with his arm around me. One evening, we were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set. It was a nightly ritual we had developed. My aunt and uncle had long since gone to bed. It was just us, the crickets, and the vast, star-dusted sky. "I can saddle Copper by myself now," I said into the comfortable silence. "Properly." He turned his head to look at me, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I know. I saw you this morning. You were watching?" "Always," he said simply. My heart did a little flip. "I'm still not a great writer." "You're better," he corrected. "You've stopped thinking so much. You're starting to feel it." We were quiet for another minute. I took a deep breath. It was time to stop being a coward. "Cole," I began, my voice a little shaky. "My flight back is supposed to be in 2 weeks." He didn't say anything. He just looked away from me, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. His jaw was tight. "I'm going to cancel it," I said. He turned back to me, his eyes wide with surprise. "Leo, I know," I interrupted, the words pouring out of me now. "I know this life is hard. I know I'm still a city boy who barely knows which end of a horse is which. But I also know that for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm home. I feel like I can breathe. And I'm not.